Hello, my name is Carolyn Wheeler with the ASCD website team. Welcome to Improving Student Learning series, the I-5 Teacher Teaching Thinking with Jane Pollock. And this is part 4 of a series that we've been doing based on Jane's One at a Time series of books. On the right side of your screen is a dashboard. Please enter your questions for the webinar team and our presenters in the questions box. Underneath that, you'll see a chat window. We will post links to the handouts and the certificate there. You may have to unminimize the boxes to see the content. To do this, click the plus sign on the top left corner of the panes. If you have technical problems during this event, please contact GoToMeeting support at 1-800-263-6317. Also be sure that you have the latest version of Java installed. If you were able to hear the webinar but you're not able to see the slides, that means you have to update Java on your computer. Go to java.com and follow the prompts to download and install the latest version of the software. And now a brief introduction to our presenter. Jane E. Pollock, Ph.D., is a former ESL and general education classroom teacher who has also worked as a school administrator and for a research laboratory. She specializes in teaching and supervising learning. Dr. Pollock is the author of numerous books including Improving Student Learning One Teacher at a Time, Classroom Instruction That Works First Edition, Improving Student Learning One Principal at a Time, and Minding the Achievement Gap One Classroom at a Time. ASCD is pleased to welcome Jane Pollock.
Hi, thank you so much, Caroline. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm quite excited to be able to do this fourth series that we have in the Improving One at a Time series. And the first one that we did was Improving Student Learning One Teacher at a Time, in which I had introduced the GNAG schema. So we'll pick up with that again. The second of the series, I actually introduced the GNAG schema, which is a lesson planning schema, to principals, and so that was really dedicated for principals who do walkthroughs, anybody who's a coach who wants to go in and improve their observation skills, giving better feedback to teachers. And then the third was really focused on minding the achievement gap, that is using GNAG and GNAG Plus for the students who are challenged either by language or disabilities, and also any students who just need a little extra help in the classroom. So this particular one of the series, the fourth one, is really focused in on teaching thinking. And one of the characteristics of being able to teach thinking today in the 21st century is that we have the technology that allows us to do that. So part of what we'll be talking about today is actually teaching thinking, that is the skills, but then a big part of what we're going to be talking about today is using technology to help us do that. So I'm quite thrilled today to be joining you again. And I know just from emails I've received from people I have spoken with and corresponded with people who've said, you know, they've been listening to all of the sessions. So here we go, we're on number 4. And I'm particularly excited about being here today because I have 2 of my good friends and colleagues joining us. So I'm going to let Frank introduce himself. And Frank, you're on.
Thank you. I'm Frank Korb. I got into, well, knowing Janie, well, it's probably about 3 years now, and worked really hard at incorporating a whole new set of planning into how I approach my classroom. This is a great opportunity, so I really appreciate the time. I'm a visual arts teacher at a high school out in Waterford, Wisconsin.
Thanks, Frank. And what Frank didn't tell you was that actually for one entire school year, Frank sent me his lesson plans every Sunday night. So I will always be grateful for that, Frank.
You are welcome.
That story. I do love that, and I'm really excited that you're with us to show us what you're doing with your website and how you have the students really interacting both with their goal setting as well as throughout the class, and of course sharing their work. In addition to Frank, we have my good friend Susan Hensley. And Susan, can you say hi to the group?
Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you in a sense. I am a curriculum specialist in Rogers in Northwest Arkansas, and I focus primarily on English language arts. My district has had the privilege of working with Dr. Pollock for the last 3 years, and I've had the privilege of working with her as we work with teachers, creating resources that we've linked to our website to increase learning across the district. I'm glad to be here today. Thanks, Janie.
Thank you. And each one of them, Frank contributed heavily to the book that was, I'll go ahead and put my screen back, to the feedback book, The Hinge That Joins Teaching and Learning, and Susan has contributed to the ASCD book, Minding the Achievement Gap, One Classroom at a Time. So if you have either of those books, you'll recognize their work in those books. And now the three of us are working on the framework called the I-5. So consistent with all of the work that I have been doing, both as a classroom teacher, as a school administrator, and certainly working at the research laboratory, my goal has always been to improve student achievement in the classroom. So today we talk about improving student engagement and therefore improving student achievement. The research is pretty clear to us, that is those of us who teach, those of us who are coaching teachers and supervising teachers. It's pretty clear that if you want to see students make gains, both in engagement and achievement, you're going to probably need to change your pedagogical automaticity. Now, normally I'd let you stop and talk with each other for a couple of minutes and figure out what that actually means. But because we're on a webinar, I'm just going to move on with pedagogy. Of course, is the study of teaching, and automaticity is those habits that we have. Sometimes we have habits that are intentional, but sometimes our habits are ones that we just inherited from people who taught before us. That is, the teachers who we watched teach. So one of the things we will talk about today is how do we change our pedagogical automaticity so that our habits help students change or improve their learning habits. And what I've learned over the years, that to improve student learning, to improve our teaching, we also really will need to improve our communication. And that will tie in nicely with part of the framework that we'll talk about today. So more specifically, today we're going to talk about teaching thinking and using technology. So I'm going to stop for just a minute, literally about 20 seconds, and let you just read the goals that are on the screen right now. So the first goal then is, if you want students to use thinking skills in the classroom, then we need to plan to teach them to use those thinking skills. And the planning schema that we'll review again, and then I'll show you how to use again, is GNAG. Setting a goal, access prior knowledge, new information, application, goal review. Again, I'll go over what GNAG stands for. At the beginning of a lesson, you would set your goal, that is your learning intention, access prior knowledge, or do your anticipatory set, teach that new information, have the students apply the knowledge either with a thinking skill or if it's procedural as a practice, and finally do a goal review where the students self-assess. The second part of the presentation then is that nowadays with bring your own devices to classrooms, one-on-one classrooms, access to the internet via a smart board or one of the interactive whiteboards, we can use technology to gather material, organize and process using thinking skills, and we're going to call that the I-5. So a teacher who plans to teach students to use technology in order to think better or to innovate or create new ideas is the I-5 teacher. So let's access our prior knowledge briefly and talk a little bit about a story that's fairly familiar to all of us. So the three little pigs. When I started thinking about how I was going to present this information, I really thought about some really deep and heavy literature. I thought about some other really amazing analogies. And then I came back to the fact that there's this simple little story called The Three Little Pigs. So, if you remember the story, and I know it's an old English folktale that has been recreated, as you can see there, the three little Hawaiian pigs with the magic shark, and of course some of the other renditions of it, like Los Tres Cochinitos. What we have is we have a story of three little pigs, the first of which wants to get out so badly that he builds his house quickly and he moves on and he goes out to buy some technology. He wants to get a smartphone. He wants to get the latest apps. He wants to do all of those kinds of things. And, well, you know what happens to his house. The second little pig decides that he's going to go after initiatives, and he wants to go after reading all the new reports and what we're supposed to know about and so on. And sure enough, we know what happens to his little house. Well, the third little pig actually is really practical. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to address the issue of practical pig. And basically practical pig is very basic. Practical pig says if you want to get gains in student learning, you probably need to plan your lessons and actually plan to have students use thinking skills. So I hope that analogy works for you, and I apologize, but today's not going to be the sexy let's go out and talk about apps and Vimeos and everything. It's really going to be how to plan a good lesson. So let me just give you a minute, about 30 seconds to a minute to just process the goals for the session. So since we're talking about teaching thinking, I thought this was an interesting article. If you look down on the bottom right-hand side, you can see that you could look up this article on your own in Scientific American, the March 2013 version. And so here is just one of the forum essays that I found intriguing. It's a little bit about thinking skills. So it says, critical thinking is a teachable skill best taught outside the classroom. Now, interesting, outside the classroom. So let's go ahead and let me briefly summarize it for you. You can certainly look it up on your own. What it says is, and this is written by a director of a museum, he says that basically our society needs better thinkers. We've heard that in other environments as well. We've heard that from the P21, that is the digital awareness and moving into the 21st century skills. We hear it from the Common Core standards. We hear it literally from everybody that the students need to be better thinkers. And so it says about a decade ago, some scientists at Vanderbilt University asked fifth graders and college students whether or not they would be able to put together a project that would be a recovery plan to protect bald eagles from extinction. Interestingly enough, both groups, fifth graders and college students, came up with the same plan. And the researchers were a little bit shocked, to be honest. And so what they thought was that they better go a little bit deeper, since both of the fifth graders as well as college students seemingly had the same set of skills. And when they went a little bit deeper, they said, what would you need to gather information about? What do you need images about? What do you need to do interactively to, in fact, create this recovery plan? And that's when things changed. That's when the fifth graders basically said they would ask questions about what do eagles eat and where do they live, whereas the college students had very deep interpretations of what are the ecosystems and what certain factors affect other factors. And it became very, very clear that the college students had this depth of knowledge and depth of ability to be able to think through issues that the fifth graders didn't have. Interestingly enough, this particular person then comes to the conclusion, and I'll read this to you. perhaps many teachers have too little time to allow students to form and pursue their own thinking questions, and too much ground to cover in curriculum and standardized tests. He goes on to say that maybe then what we should do is we should give over teaching thinking to organizations like museums. What do you think? Do you think that we should, in fact, give over the teaching of thinking to organizations outside of the classroom? I find that a really intriguing argument. So if we were going to make this argument, if we had more than an hour together, we would make a claim, state our evidence as to whether or not teaching should be taught outside of the classroom, because we're too busy, evidently, with curriculum and standardized tests, according to that author. We would have to go out and elaborate our information with details, and also be able to, again, construct this argument so that we would make, using this thinking skill, we would be able to make our own determination. One of the things we do in a thinking skill, of course, is we interact with others to gather more information. We interact with others to get better resources. So creating an argument, of course, is a thinking skill or an inquiry skill. And to inquire, one needs information, interaction, and images. And that leads us to the framework that we'd like to talk about with you today. Of course, the framework, we're going to have the people come back and say, but we'd like to teach thinking except that we have all these technology initiatives. We'd like to teach thinking except that we're teaching to the Common Core, and that includes it. We'd like to teach thinking, but we're busy just reading the 21st century type articles. And our suggestion is that, in fact, if you listen to all of the information that is out there from sources like these, that basically it leads us to that practical pig scenario, which is, let's just put one brick at a time and get moving on this because we can. So the I-5 framework, in effect, says if you want to use a thinking skill, you need to gather information, you need to gather images, you need to interact, and you need to actually deepen your knowledge with an inquiry skill or a thinking skill. If you do all of that, you are more likely to innovate. So we suggest that the I-5 teacher really uses technology in order to help students gather better information. I remember, as you know, I have talked with many teachers with lesson planning, that gathering information from a textbook just is not as open as gathering information online, where you have lots of sources. The images that we have sometimes in print material are not as expansive as if you go into, say, a Google image, for example. And certainly we know that interaction today is increasingly more real-time and, of course, more worldwide than it's ever been before. And again, we're back to that inquiry idea. We need to teach thinking if we want students to think, and if we want them to be able to invent new ideas or actually innovate. We have a long history of wanting to teach students thinking skills, dating back, of course, to Horace Mann up there, 1854, and then moving on through history to A Nation at Risk. There you see Benjamin Bloom down there in 1956, and of course today, the 21st century. At ASCD, we wrote a book in the early 1990s about teaching thinking, dimensions of learning, and then we wrote another book and updated that, Classroom Instruction That Works, and many of you recognize the Classroom Instruction That Works, Chapter 2, which is Identifying Similarities and Differences, Chapter 9, Generating and Testing Hypotheses, and Chapter 10, the Analytical Questions. Those are the thinking skills chapters. So as we put these bricks together, basically what we're saying is history has shown us, and the research is showing us, that we probably need to teach the students thinking skills. And in our last session, we talked about and update our schema from our Madeline Hunter schema to GNAG. I'm going to go right to GNAG because we did see this in the last couple of sessions. And with GNAG, as you remember, when you set that goal at the beginning of the lesson, access prior knowledge, a big part of teaching that new information is, in fact, to get the students to apply those thinking skills. In a minute or two, Susan's going to come on and show us how we teach those thinking skills from Classroom Instruction That Works, how we teach those thinking skills in the elementary classrooms, and then again we'll pass it on to Frank to share more practical examples at the secondary level. So as we move on with building a better lesson plan, it is still about GNAG and it's still about using the 9 high-yield strategies, but the focus in on thinking and inquiry really does say that if you want to build a better lesson using GNAG, then you probably need to plug in and use what we're going to call the I-5. That is better information, better images, better interaction, and absolutely plug in that thinking skill. So a teacher can plan lessons, as you'll see in a couple of minutes, where we use the research-based strategies, but we also seek the tech solutions as part of the solution, and not just because it's a new app or not just because we have a new electronic notebook and so on, but we really use technology to help us gather information, help us interact, help us gather images, and help us do that so we can have the students do the thinking. For some of you, it may be interesting to see the thinking skill or see the research, the 9 high-yield strategies lined up with the I-5. And as we get to the lesson plans, what you'll start seeing is Susan, for example, will show us an example of classification, which is an associating thinking skill. She'll also show us an example of systems analysis, which is an analytical thinking skill, and we'll see an example of decision making, of course, which is one of the thinking skills. So we're back to kind of the overarching idea of the I-5, which is that if you want students to deepen their knowledge with inquiry, then today in the 21st century, we really need a framework to help us bring in technology. We don't want to use technology for the sake of using technology, but we want to use technology because it benefits us to get better information, get better images, get better interaction, and all of that will allow our inquiry instruction to teach students how to be better thinkers. While you're just looking at the screen for a minute, I'll go ahead and pass this on to Susan to give us some elementary examples of using the I-5 and using GNAG to teach thinking.
Hi, everybody. You should see right now our school district's homepage. This is from Rogers Public Schools in Northwest Arkansas, and the web address is rogerschools.net. As we've been working with Dr. Pollock, we have tried to use our web page as a communication device to help us share our resources and our learnings with other teachers. So I'm going to take you to one of our pages. If you click on curriculum at the top above our photograph, and then I'm going to go to one of the elementary curriculum pages. I am just going to go to first grade. But on any of our curriculum pages, if you scroll down, we have a link to a page called Resources to Improve Student Learning. And on this particular page, you'll see resources that we have gathered that our teachers have created. As we've worked with Dr. Pollock and we've learned about using GNAG, well, we've got examples of GNAG lessons, and we have examples of scoring objective sheets, lesson planning templates, all kinds of stuff. But today I want to show you, we're going to go to a PowerPoint that I have linked here as you scroll down in the far right column under Webinar Resources. And started with it. You have already been introduced to the I-5 framework, and so in these next few slides, I hope that you'll see how we are just beginning to learn about this, and we're working on using information and images and interaction, inquiry, all of this to get to innovation, that all of these are overlapping, but in the next few slides, we are really going to focus on inquiry. Our state, like many states, has adopted the Common Core State Standards. We are in our second year of implementation for K-2. This is our first year for 3-5, and next year K-12 will all be on board. And we're learning that we are just beginning to understand the depth of these standards. And as we're learning about, for instance, the first 3 standards are really, these are the reading anchor standards, and the first 3 are really focusing on key ideas and details, and then the next 3 get a little bit deeper, and you learn about the crafting structure and how that intensifies your understanding of the text, and you finally get down to the integration of knowledge and ideas. Well, we're learning that the teaching thinking skills is helping us tremendously as we are challenging our students to perform these standards. But it's not just using the thinking skills, it's teaching students the steps to use the thinking skills themselves. So let me show you some examples. The thinking skills, here is a page that has thinking skills divided into 3 different categories. And these 3 categories go directly with a high yield strategy. The yellow across the top, identifying similarities and differences. The orange in the middle is using analysis, which is part of cues, questions, and advanced organizers. And then finally the pink, generating and testing hypothesis. And you can see that there are definite steps for teaching the students how to use these different types of thinking skills. Today, like Jenny mentioned, we're going to dip into some classrooms and see an example of a comparing lesson, a lesson using systems analysis, and a lesson using decision making. We are now going to go visit a 2nd grade classroom. These examples have come from Miss Olguin's class, and her students were working on in a unit called A Long Journey to Freedom. And within this unit, they were learning about Ruby Bridges. As you can see, this anchor standard at the top, this is what we want our kids to be, if they're college and career ready. When they leave, they should be able to analyze how 2 or more texts address similar themes or topics in order to build knowledge or to compare the approaches authors take. As 2nd graders are working on this standard, what they're focusing on is comparing and contrasting the most important points presented by 2 texts on the same topic. Yvette chose 2 books on Ruby Bridges. She was using The Story of Ruby Bridges, which is a biography, and then also the autobiography, Ruby Bridges Goes to School. For many of our students, these are examples of challenging, complex text for 2nd graders. And so Ms. Olguin has used the internet to bring in images and videos to help students learn more about Ruby Bridges and to help the students build their own background knowledge as they're learning about Ruby Bridges instead of Ms. Olguin telling them everything. She's helping the kids to build it themselves, and this information in the form of images is so powerful. As the students were gathering information about Ruby Bridges, they used their interactive notebook and they took notes. I'm going to go on to the next slide, but keep this notebook in your mind. They were challenged with comparing the most important points presented on these 2 texts. And so as they took notes in their notebook, they were doing the first 2 steps of comparing. Prior to this lesson, Mrs. Olguin has specifically taught these steps. So the students knew when they were taking their notes, they were finding the items to compare, the 2 books, and then they were choosing the features to compare. And so if I go back, you can see the features right here that they were comparing. When they got down to the 3rd step, I can tell how the items are the same or the same or different. The students created a double bubble graphic organizer where they compared the 2 books were written in the orange circles, and then they found things that were the same in the yellow circles in the middle, and then they balanced things that were different in the green circles on the outside. So we've seen images, we've seen gathering of information, they've applied this thinking skill to help deepen their knowledge, and then they've also used interaction in this process by working with partners. You can see an example of Ms. Olguin's partner wheel, where she matches kids up to do the cooperative learning and working with partners with that particular structure. I'll let you process that for about 15 seconds, and then we'll move on.
Susan, before you move on, this is Janie speaking. As far as the use of technology, if we can go back to this previous slide.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the comments that you made, which is really important, is that the teacher was able to use the technology to really grasp those images and some other appropriate information for the students to be able to see what civil rights is about and really make it a student picture and student understanding. And then, of course, I think if I remember correctly, I think this was the group that we worked with, where the students then went on to do their presentation of the material, and then again they go back to using technology. I think they did the, is it the Glockster?
I believe they used the information that they gathered here to, in a culminating activity, they created a Glockster poster.
Right, which is basically using technology to create a poster, but then also you can put that on your website for your class. You can really share materials then, and the students can actually access that at home and show their parents what they made and so on. So I was really proud of how they put this whole process together. And again, to me, this is a really classic I-5 example where it's a really different lesson because of the I-5. So thanks.
Thanks. And teaching the steps and actually using the thinking skill helped them to really deepen their understanding so then they could go on and create quality projects like that.
Right, right.
Okay, this next example is a 4th grade classroom, and this is a science lesson. Mrs. Grayson is teaching her students about electrical circuits, and she realized that she wanted her students to really understand what an electrical circuit was, how it worked, and so she decided to teach the students how to do a systems analysis. The steps are here on the screen, and she set her goal and accessed the prior knowledge, and as she began presenting new information, she used a brain pop video on their smartboard, so the students saw the electrical current, and then they read about it in a text that she had, and then they finally created one themselves. You can see them in the picture here. And when they were finished with that, they went back and in their notebook they took notes on the steps of the systems analysis. They knew that they had to identify something as a system, which was the electrical circuit. They had to state how all the parts worked. And then they began, in their experimenting, they began changing part of the system. Like they would insert a piece of paper. They would break the wire and insert paper in between, and or a nickel or a dime. And then they would make a conclusion about how that one change made the system change. So within this lesson, the students had a concrete example of a system, and then they were able to apply these steps. It was a powerful lesson, and the students had a tremendous understanding of the electrical circuit when it was done.
Again, just for clarification, this is Janie again. The systems analysis ties back to the 9 high-yield strategies, and it would be in that chapter 9 of the first edition of Classroom Instruction That Works, whereas the lesson previous to this, the comparing, was an example of chapter 2, identifying similarities and differences. So again, this is a great example also of where a teacher, if the students each have their own electronic notebook, with some children do have iPads or they have a device, they can go in and kind of view the brain pop either in groups on their own or as a class with a smart board or Promethean, and then importantly then they actually get the thinking skill taught.
Another powerful piece about this lesson is Ms. Grayson took pictures of a lot of it that took pictures of them making the electrical systems, and they used them in this next lesson. So they had images of themselves as we go on to the next one. In English Language Arts, they were working on poems, and specifically they were working with this standard, analyzing the structure of sentences, paragraphs, etc. And for this lesson, they needed to analyze the structure of a limerick. Since the students knew the steps of a systems analysis, Ms. Grayson thought this would be an excellent opportunity to use it in ELA. It could cross over from science to literacy. And so the students went through the same process. They checked out their interactive notebooks. They had taken notes on the steps for doing the systems analysis. So they determined that a limerick was a system, and they took notes on the characteristics of a limerick and talked about how all of those things have to be in place in order for it to be a limerick. Once they had established that it was indeed a system, then they went to the internet and they looked up limericks. And as they searched and found some, they began reading them on their, you can see Ms. Goff here, as they're reading limericks on their smartboard. The students were going through the parts and identifying the parts of the limerick based on their notes. Is it humorous? Does it have 5 lines? Do they rhyme? Etc. And determining whether it was a limerick or not. To apply this new information they've learned, the students were all given a limerick. They worked in groups, and each group was given a limerick. You can see the sample here at the bottom. And they were asked to change part of it, and then to determine if it's still a limerick. So they went through the steps of systems analysis. And you can see this one at the bottom where they made changes. And these students all knew that when they made one change, it suddenly wasn't a limerick anymore, and they wanted it to stay a limerick. So they went back and continued making changes. And so their final conclusion was, it is indeed a limerick. Now we
So
will
again, this is one of those great examples where the teacher taught the thinking skill in one class, then because they had taken some pictures, they bring them back up, they kind of remember that, then they use that same thinking skill now in another subject area, and it was really, really powerful. It was nice that you mentioned Ms. Goff, who is in the picture there, because she's a coach. She's one of the school coaches, and so one of the things she's able to do is kind of go classroom to classroom and very often really apply these same thinking skills using technology across the building. So it's also not just happening in one of the classrooms.
Now we're moving on to the last of the categories, generating and testing the hypothesis, and we're going to talk about how a kindergarten teacher used decision-making, the critical thinking skill decision-making with her kindergartners. In Ms. Benko's class, they were working on a social studies unit that actually crossed over into literacy, but this particular unit was on American symbols. And the students were each day reading a different book about American symbols, taking notes, and their social studies standard was identifying American symbols, but the ELA standard was identifying main ideas and supporting details, so these wove together beautifully. In addition, as Ms. Benko read the book, on this particular day, the students were reading the book, The Bald Eagle, and instead of holding the book up like we traditionally do, and to do a read aloud, this particular day, Ms. Benko put it under her document camera with the idea that she can share not only the pictures but also the text. Giving students more time with eyes on text using our document cameras. She also pulled in a YouTube video where the students, they had read about the American eagle, but now they got to see it fly and hear the sounds it made and watch it swoop down and catch a fish. So as the students gathered their information, they took notes. Now keep in mind, they would do the same activity with all 5 of these different symbols. I was visiting with Ms. Benko and her coworker, Ms. Talley, and they said they really felt like they needed some type of culminating activity to do at the end of the notebook. Well, here you can see that the notebook does not have a picture on the front of it. It just had the title. And so they decided that to culminate and bring together all that the kids had learned, they would use the decision-making thinking skill. And so they had the kids decide what symbols should they put on the front of their notebook. And they narrowed it down to 3 symbols. They came up with the criteria for each of the symbols. And then together as a class, they worked through it on the smartboard, but they used beans. And so their first criteria might have been, makes me think of freedom. The second one might have been, how many times do you see that symbol? And so the students would go across and they would think about the American flag, and they would have to decide, wow, on a scale of I only have 5 beans for this row. So how many beans do I want to put in there? How much does the American flag make me think of freedom? And so maybe they put 2 beans. And on the eagle, maybe it was 1 bean, and on the Liberty Bell, maybe it was 2 beans. And as they continued, when they got down to the bottom, they were able to count and add up to determine which symbol they would put on the front of their notebook. Do you want to add something to that, Jamie?
Well, I'm just saying that it's so great. It's so great to see these thinking skills at these levels because, as you know, most of the time we see examples of the thinking skills being used at the secondary level, middle school, high school, and so it's great to see them introduced at these levels, and then also see how the technology, the use of YouTube, the use of the different websites, and even just letting the students be able to see the whole book up there with all the text really does help the students tremendously. And then again, like some other teachers, you just take pictures of the students' work, post it on your classroom website, and now the interaction becomes really powerful for the students themselves. Susan, thank you so much for sharing these, and I know you've posted a lot of these on your website to make them accessible to all of the listeners.
If you'd like to see them in more detail, they're there, and thank you. It's been a pleasure.
It's been great. And so speaking of interacting and sharing that, let's go ahead and pass that on to Frank, because we can't wait to see your website, Frank.
Thank you. I'm looking for mine. I don't know if I've got access to it yet. Yeah, still see Rogers Public School.
Sorry.
That's okay. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. Thanks. You know, this is a wonderful opportunity, and I appreciate having it. Thank you very much. I've got a lot of things to show, and I'm probably going to run out of time, so I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me and ask. My goals page started out about 2.5, 3 years ago because I was shown a new way that I could get kids interested in what we're doing in class. It was like amazing. If I can get the kids to be working harder without doing a whole lot more, this is the way to go. Why wouldn't anybody want to do it? So when I began my goals page, it started out with a pretty boring header at the top, and it had a few goals on it. Well, over time, I realized that I could use my goals page for more than just interaction, or for more than just the goals, rather. It's now become more about me communicating in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom. Every student in my classroom gets a binder. So we've got a in-class binder, and in that binder they have their daily goals. It's got the effort they're giving, goal number 1 and number 2 often. This is very much, if you've ever seen an interactive binder, it's a lot of the beginning and end of class understanding. In this section here on the end, the comments and generalization, and on Fridays we journal, this has really become the biggest and most important part of it, I think, for the kids, because it makes them think about what they're doing in class. And I'm going to go back to this part in a minute because of the collaboration we're doing in class.
And Frank, can I just interrupt for a minute? Part of what you're starting to introduce was prior to working together, you just had your lesson plans and you would set what your intention was for the lesson. But with GNAG, the goal setting and the goal interaction is really a part of the student work in a class. So while we're seeing these, it's a result of starting to GNAG your lesson and making that goal really interactive for the students. Absolutely. It has, it's really changed the way everything operates in the classroom. Oh, and the lessons are way better too. So what started out as a really boring blog site that the kids saw 2 goals on has really become a place for me to give resources. It's a place where all of my content is given from, and it's really becoming more collaborative in the classroom through the website. I've worked with author Ted Orland out in California, photographer, with another blog I've done about his book, Art and Fear. And we've had students commenting on this book outside of class, but with the author and with me and with one another, and it's been this wonderful collaborative effort. We're doing a little bit more now collaboratively, but I'll come to that in a minute. Let me scroll down a few things that I do with my page. So when I'm out of the class,
I think video is one of the most fun ways for me to be in the classroom. If I'm gone for an entire day, or if I'm gone for 1 hour, I try really hard to put together a 2 or 3 minute video. I won't bore you with the video. You can go to my website, which is corbartwhs.wordpress.com, and you can take a look at that video and follow me and follow my Twitter feed and the whole 9 yards. Yeah, marketing. But one of the things it does for my students, hopefully, is it reminds them that I'm still in the room with them. Whether I'm there or not, my expectations are still very high. And we're talking high schoolers, and when they've given the opportunity to work in my classroom, they really take every advantage of it and they make use of it. But it gives me a little face time with them. I get to pick on them a little bit while I'm doing whatever else I'm doing, so I can throw my small bit of dry humor at them while I'm gone. It also gives me an opportunity to cover some of the specifics that my guest teacher, my substitute, might miss. As I scroll down, you can see over here on this map that I am worldwide, and that's one of the great things about the internet is there are people all the way over here in Australia who are looking at my stuff on a daily basis. And it's because I'm very focused on what I do. I approach each class with a great sense of intention. I'm very aware, and GNAG is what did it for me in that I'm more aware of my teaching strategies. It's less shooting off the cuff, and it's every Sunday night sitting down for some time. I won't tell you how much time, but planning my week out, planning with goals and accessing prior knowledge and that sort of work. My goal page does deal with the daily agenda items, but this isn't what I focus on. I focus on the accessing of prior knowledge, the second step of GNAG, and this is APK. What do we see here? What are things you imagine? This was the beginning of today's conversation in my Art Foundations class. And we had a great discussion about what symbolism kids had with a star and different things that they interpreted. And once they clicked on this, it took them to the Art News website, which is the world's most read magazine on the visual arts. And so we did some...
For a minute, do you mind? First of all, of course, as always, I just wanted to interrupt for just a minute for those teachers, the teachers who are observing who may not be art teachers. And so similar to what you've done, people have been really inspired, who I work with in Australia, for example. And they've been very inspired, for example, a math teacher who has now put together a website, similar idea, puts the goals up on the website, and then because he's doing a flipped classroom, he does what you do, which is he will have a place that will be very evident to the students. Click on this, it takes you to basically your lesson that you'll watch the night before and then come to class, and then they go right to the website and they kind of pick up from there. Similarly, if you're a history teacher or if you're teaching other subject areas, again, you can set up your website really similar to yours to create that interaction for the students, and so that the students can, I love the idea they can click on this and go to a website, gather information, go to another website, get some images, and all of this interaction is all kind of gathering up steam so that when you get to the application part of a lesson, you're either using a thinking skill or in your case you're very evidently creating a product.
Absolutely. This was a brand new thing for students. We've never really talked about abstract art, especially at a high school level. And so this was why this was great. We brought in a bunch of laptops today, and they went through the actual article with me. I had the magazine in my hand, but they were reading it on the screen, and then I turned them loose and I gave them the opportunity to search some of the artists that were listed, like Chris Martin, and they, some of them were really bothered by this abstract artwork, and some of them absolutely loved it. They were seeing things out there today that they'd never even seen. It's not in the textbooks. And that's what's so great about working live with this kind of stuff is technology is now. That video that's at the top of my page, I shot it yesterday, spent 20 minutes editing, and put it up there. I use WordPress, and it's a great blog site. And there's a lot of other websites. I guess this is the sexy stuff, but you know, Weebly is out there, and Edmodo is out there. There's tons of different places that you can reference. I build everything on WordPress because it works for me. When I started this use of goals, I wasn't really sure what I was doing. Well, I know I wasn't sure what I was doing. And after a while, Janie and I had this conversation, and she really turned me on to looking at the national standards for visual arts versus the state standards, because it's just the national standards made more sense. It's what everybody in the nation was looking at. And now we've got the CCSS coming up, which is great. It's a place to look. So today's goals in my Art Foundations class are research and information fluency, which is from the NETS, the National Educational Technology Standards. And then the second one is to create multiple solutions. And what's in parentheses is my unpacking of that gigantic educational mumble jumble that these kids have no clue what means. Well, they know what solutions is, but it's been simplified. In fact, this process was a great process that I went through 2 years ago with a group of students and my student teacher, where we took a look at the national standards and we unpacked them. We sat down at tables for evenings on end discussing, what does this even mean? There's a lot of work up front, but now, 2 years later, it's great. When I'm reading critiques, kids are talking about, I did 12 drawings because I was never happy with my first one. And now we've got these great things like creating multiple solutions to visual challenges. They know what it means. They realize that it's not just their first idea. And to end each section of the class with, I end up with, at the bottom of the section, this is my generalization. This is the end of GNAG. The N and the A, the kids don't really see me put up on the screen because that's what we do in class. That's the activity, the new knowledge is the conversation we have. But the generalization at the end of the day, let me find my binder insert, this is where we do the generalization. So I might ask them some questions, and sometimes I use what I've written the night before, and sometimes I'm just, you know, making it up, or they're getting close to the bell, and I give them the opportunity to have a conversation back and forth with their classmates about, well, what was the biggest thing you accomplished today? And they have that conversation, and they move on. They've given themselves an end to the class. So goals have really carried me quite far. And this is at the high school level. I see what elementary students do with their interactive binders. We've got a wonderful middle school here in Waterford, and they do this also. And I've seen the stuff that the kids do with their interactive binders. Mine is a little bit different in that it's actually a lot the same. It's all about organization and keeping these kids thinking. One of the other things that this website has really helped me with is providing resources. I've got content. Scroll up to the top of my window, and each of my classes has their own page, from Art Foundations to Advanced Placement Studio Art to my drawing class. Now let's see how quickly this opens. With these courses, I give them lots of hands-on stuff, all of their syllabuses, all of their sketchbook assignments. It's all right here for them to look at. So you can look at the handbook, which I'll show you in a moment, the syllabus, the sketchbook assignments. If we've got examples of student work, I will put links to that here. This is a nice project we're doing right now. This is a portrait, and the students were studying Fauvism, and they're using their Snapchats. So they're bringing in their technology. Well, actually, they use mine. But I passed my cell phone around, and they all made goofy Snapchat pictures, which is, I don't know, I have a teenage daughter at home, and it's something they do. I don't have time for that. But they're using their contemporary social media to create these great works of art. And I tied it in with Fauvism. And I also tied it into what's happening in hip-hop culture, how the hip-hop artists of New York and Brooklyn have brought music and visuals, and we took a look at all sorts of great stuff online about that. Again, online, worldwide, and it was live. Let me just show you, let's see, binder inserts. here is an example of what I've done. These are some of my students' works. And so we make progress, mid-critique sort of works, and they use this to reflect on how they're doing. And one of the things that I'm doing with the work now is I'm trying very hard to work in collaboration with technology. Initially, my website was built up so it was really just a teacher-student. Here's my information, I'm giving it to you. Well, thankfully we have email, and I've been getting feedback from the students. I have a question about this, or more importantly, or equally importantly, I've been getting feedback from parents. So now it's become this teacher, student, teacher, parent place to work, and through things like Google Drive or other cloud software, we're able to do collaborative work where it's becoming student-to-student work. And let me share with you one of the collaborative pieces that we're doing right now. During all of my projects, all of our projects, I've built a Google Doc that all of my advanced students go and they download from a template menu. So they'll go to Google Documents, Google Drive, and they'll download this. So this is one of my students' works. In the beginning of the process, this is all them. They'll make the photographs and they'll make the comments. And partway through the process, we make photographs of their drawing, however it's going. This was before she added pastel to it. And then they'll add their own comments. Well, what we're doing now is we've shared it. And I have other students who are, by Friday, going to be commenting on this particular young woman's drawings. And one of the things I left them with today was, would you want feedback now or later? And they all said now, of course. And so I encourage them, well, if you want feedback now, make sure you're giving feedback now. And this is one way that we're working with collaboration. I had mentioned the blog with my author friend, Ted, out in California, and that's another way we're using some, that's a WordPress document. But so technology has been really a fantastic thing for my students, for me to use in the classroom. But you know, I also use some pretty old technology. I give out my business cards to every single kid. So they've got my website and my home phone number, which people were a little weird about. But if I have a student who needs to get a hold of me, I give them my phone number. They can look me up on Google, frankkorb.com. You're going to come up with my address. So fortunately, no one's ever egged my house. Well, at least not from this school. It's great. You know, the technology is wonderful. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. Let me go back to my website. Oh, yeah, the goals. There we go. A couple of the things that I've done is, in addition to producing videos when I'm not here in school, I've also done a whole bunch of, and this would be the flipped classroom sort of thing, but I still do a lot of the demonstrations. This is a 2-point perspective video that I've produced, and it's all on YouTube. I've done a whole series of drawing perspective videos because the kids really have a hard time with this in their foundations class. And so you can see 29,000 people have looked at this website, and after today I'm hoping it's 29,383 people. You know, it's a wonderful place for them to, I can have Mr. Korb in my family room at 10 o'clock at night teaching me, and I don't have to bother him. I'm struggling with this, I can go there and do that. And I've seen a lot of other teachers in our school and at the grade schools do this sort of work also, where they'll do some math units and they'll have that there. You know, one of the great things about this technology is it's not just something that I can use. I've seen technology used in all the other classrooms. And on top of the technology, it's the whole GNAG philosophy. This can be done everywhere. History class, science class, math, high school, graded school. I'm doing a staff development meeting tomorrow. The first thing on my handout are my goals, and then we move in. And it's a wonderful opportunity. So if there's any questions, you can always email me, and I think that information is going to come out later, but it's fjkorb@gmail.com. And so I will turn it back over to Caroline.
All right, actually, Frank, this is Janie. I'm going to go ahead and just take it back for just a minute. And first of all, say thanks again to you. And I hope that you'll get some other followers because, as you know, I get your subscribed presentation every single morning.
6:30 a.m.
I do. I get it, and I love getting it. So anyway, let me just do a quick wrap-up of where we are. And that is that, again, kind of going back to the simple practical pig, as I have listened both to Susan and to Frank share your examples. Susan intentionally very clearly focused on inquiry, and you intentionally focused on the interaction. The reason we chose to focus on those two are because information and images using technology were quite easily assumed in both of your examples. But one of the things that I think that both of you have shown us is with a really good lesson planning schema based on high-yield strategies, that is GNAG, then we actually have to have a way to think about using technology. And one of the things that's been frustrating to both of you and to other teachers is when we go out and get training on an app, or when we go get technology training and it's about a very specific application, whereas here we're introducing the I-5 more along the lines as a framework, is understanding that if I use the technology either for interaction, images, or information, it's a better opportunity to then have students use thinking skills and innovate or create new ideas. So I hope that the experience has been good. It was great to listen to you again, Susan, and Frank again. Thanks for your examples that are so clear and others can follow on. Carolyn, thank you so much. We love doing these webinars with ASCD and really appreciate any opportunities that people would like to get in contact with us. We're happy to respond.
Thank you, Jane. On your screen are 3 of Jane's books that are available in the ASCD store. You can search for them by title or just by Jane's name, and they are available for purchase. This website will be archived at ascd.org/webinar archives in about 5 days. Please read the follow-up email from GoToWebinar that you will receive tomorrow. It will have the links to Jane's presentation as well as the link to the archive page and the certificate. I will get the email address, or rather the website address for Frank's site and Susan's site, and I will put that in the follow-up email as well. Our next webinar is this Thursday with Robin Jackson. It's based on her newest book, Never Underestimate Your Teachers. That's at 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time. If you'd like to register for our other webinars, please visit ascd.org/webinars for a listing of what's coming up. And we also invite you to check out our webinar series dedicated to the Common Core. You can view and register for those sessions at ascd.org/Common Core webinars. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time.